Greetings, Toffees. Welcome back to another episode of The Blue Frontier. James here, joined by Ryan and, drumroll, we've got Sean Kahn back on the pod after a couple-week hiatus. He was across the pond, he was at a wedding, he was all over the place, but he is back for this episode, and we are very glad to have him. On this show, we're going to do a few different things. We're going to start with some news bits because at long last, some progress is starting to be made on the Everton front, on the executive front, so we'll hit that real quick, and then we want to get into the meat of the episode, which is going position by position through Everton's squad and looking at players who are at the end of their contract or very close to the end of their contract and discussing decisions that the club should take regarding their future. So before we get into that, just a reminder, if you enjoy the show, you like this episode, please do us a favor and subscribe. Leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice. Follow us on social media. We've sourced a lot of the commentary on this episode from our community, which we really appreciate. Join our Discord. All the links in the description. With that, we get into the first news bit of the day, which just broke today, and that was the official announcement from the club that Goodison Park will become the permanent home of the Everton Women at the start of next season, which is a huge announcement, and I think had been rumored in the recent past couple weeks, talked about, but the official announcement came today. So starting 25-26, the Everton Women will move in permanently. The original plan, which was to tear down Goodison, the Friedkin Group decided to scrap that. They'll have to do some modernization to meet the Women's Super League standards, but hopefully that's nothing too material or dramatic. And there's going to be other events at the Goodison Park as well. They're going to be hosting academy matches, as well as Everton in the community events. So I guess to start things off, good announcement. We all view this as a positive development across the board.
Yeah, especially I think from, we talk about Everton as a commercial improvement opportunity, right, for the Friedkins. And I think this is just another way of them looking at an opportunity for the women's team to take advantage of it, right? And so I give them credit after, they had a thought process of just completely jettisoning it, but they thought better, and it could be a good thing, and impressed by the club that they made the announcement.
Opens up some possibilities, you think, too. Part of me is a little disappointed that they could never really work something out with the council and kind of develop that land for maybe some of the needs, the greater needs of the city. But that being said, yeah, I just think of the possibilities. I mean, you certainly don't need 40,000 seats in there for women's football necessarily. That might be almost too big, really. But there's some other things you can do with the stands and some of the facilities. I think you can create all sorts of different opportunities for events. I just think it's a really kind of interesting angle. It also helps maybe keep some of the businesses, the local businesses there, already gainfully employed in other events too, not just on your typical game day. That could help buffer maybe some of the day-to-day, some of the weekend losses that they'll have by the migration into Bramley Moor Docks. So I think it's really interesting, and I'm fascinated to see what they do with it.
Yeah, really interested to see the modernization plans and what that entails, and really the fact that there's so much history in that building and that's going to be preserved is just incredible, and I think ultimately the right decision. It does change, I think, some of the calculus as far as, a lot of people were thinking this Sunday would be their last time ever setting foot in Goodison Park, and now they'll have the opportunity to go back and relive those memories and see a different team play, but I think there will be additional interest maybe. I would be surprised if there aren't people who haven't seen the Everton Women play yet that would be more eager to go to a game now, knowing that it's at Goodison and they can kind of revisit their old match day routines and things like that.
They're changing the story. It's that simple.
I'm trying not to do it. I'm trying. I think it also has an interesting impact on PSR. There's some things you can play around with a little bit. I think some of the reasons to not have the stadium were the maintenance fees and some of the other things. And I mean, some of the stuff that maybe Bill was slightly exaggerating about. But the truth of the matter is, I mean, it's not cheap to maintain a place like that. So modernization stuff, upgrades would be capital anyway. But women's football is exempt from PSR calculations. So anything you're really funneling into it that would be typically expense doesn't count now. So maybe that's part of the calculus at all. But really, it just depends on how much the Friedkins intend to spend and invest into it. But yeah, I mean, kind of gets your imagination running. I think there's some interesting things they could do. One thing that was encouraging, I think, is the immediate investments in the women's team this year. And they turned around and had a great second half of the year, still are. That kind of leads us into the main focus for what we're talking about today, and that's recruitment in general. It is silly season. It has started, but there's still a lot of things up in the air, right?
Yeah, so I think the biggest kind of news came out yesterday is Angus Kinnear officially taking helm of Everton before the June 1st date, but inside information, hearing from the Goodison pubs, that Angus might have been seen at Finch Farm a little bit earlier than that. So it seems like he is hard at work. There is, I think, when we've talked about it so much on this pod, it's a massive summer, and a lot of these actions, right, that a normal CEO, sporting director, director of football, to kind of prepare for this moment and this situation would take place far before, let's just say the mid-May timeframe, right? So another kind of big news piece, nothing official at the moment, but Nick Hammond should be in place. Lots of discussion about him and his role. Kind of, I think the way we see it is that he would be both a consultant and a negotiator for the deals, right? Especially too, just given the amount of lucrative and exorbitant agent fees that are out there, right? And to limit those in the future, especially as we go on our massive spending spree. Probably the last big point of news that we want to talk about, and Patty reported it with The Athletic, Dan Purdy. The club did not fire him, right? Dan Purdy resigned. They did try to keep him, and I think that's kind of a good statement of intent, at least from the club, seeing the positive contributions he's made, especially throughout the last few years, both him and Thelwell. We've spoken very highly of both of those individuals. So yeah, work is continuing with Nolan on the director of football ops position, while Chris Howarth, who owns his own data analytics company, Insight Sport, is also a strong contender for the head of strategy role. So the Friedkin Group, once again, right, their interest is really in terms of the metrics and analytics to really give Everton that competitive edge, especially going into probably the biggest summer we've had in a long time.
I think the best way to do that, too, is to acquire the edge, rather than internally develop it. It would take too long, but eventually you've got to meld and have an idea how you want to play and use those models to find opportunities within the marketplace. I think Purdy resigning was a bit of a curveball to them. I think they were a little surprised about that. I credit to him to doing it the second he knew he had some doubts in terms of how they were operating going forward. To me, that's a concern, not just for the clubs, but it's concern to me that a guy who, you guys have heard me say it, I have a lot of respect for Dan. I think Dan has good insight, has a good idea on what it takes to kind of build a club back, especially into this league, what wins, what doesn't. And for him to kind of look at this when they started getting to business and saying, I don't think this is going to work out for me, is a little bit concerning. Now, it might just be the structure. I've been critical of the structure. I don't like it personally. Doesn't mean it can't work. But I think that hire in terms of who they bring on to be on the transfer committee that's going to represent recruitment, I think is really important. I think Nick Hammond does not have any predilection to acquiesce to a manager. That's kind of my concern, not David Moyes necessarily, but I just don't think that short-term viewpoint is the right one. I think Everton need to be patient, build. But anyway, Angus is the key linchpin here. For him to get started earlier is massive. I still just think a lot of it's falling on a CEO that, as opposed to a sporting director, that just would be my preference. But it is what it is. It seems like we're moving at least a little bit.
Yeah, pieces are starting to fall into place. And look, you can have your questions and concerns about the proposed structure, but we don't even have anything close to that structure fully in place yet. So we're just talking about stuff in theory at this point.
But there are all these transfer rumors, James.
Yeah, well, of course. And there's a million transfer rumors floating around. And as listeners of the show will know, we haven't really addressed any of them, because how can you when the CEO just took the helm yesterday? There's just a lot that needs to be finalized before we can take any of these rumors serious at all, because it's just stuff's flying around and it's absurd. That said, Thomas Souček nailed on first signing of the summer. I can almost guarantee it.
Just stop that. Why? Why do you have to do that? Like, that's not in the script. You're going off script and making it that much worse.
First of all, it's an outline. It's not a script. And I will take artistic liberty where I see fit.
That's fine. Just recognize there's going to be a response to that artistic liberty sometimes.
Fair enough. But yes, all in all, things seem to be starting to fall into place, which I think we view as a positive. Ramping into the summer, not much time left, just a couple games. So with that, I think it's a good time to pivot into the meat of the episode, the main portion, which is, of course, going through the squad. Ryan, you wanted to introduce this section and walk us through a little bit of the finances as well.
We got me all fired up now. So God knows what I'm going to say. No, in all seriousness, I think it's really easy to go through player by player and say keep or not. I think you need to do that with a little bit of context. I think the first piece of context is just squad turnover in general. It's not easy to manage massive turnover in a squad. I think there are different theories on it. I would be a little more bullish personally about turning over the squad. Now might be our best window to make a big investment. I'll get to the finances in a second. That's the case. As far as I'm concerned, I got no problem with someone maybe not being as effective or taking time to acclimate in year one because I'd be focused on year two. But it depends on how you go about doing it. So maybe the mix of players matters. Beyond that, too, I think one big aspect of this is the finances. And talking PSR specifically, I'm going to assume that the Friedkins are willing to front the cast to make the initial investments so that he can jumpstart the club a little bit. I don't think their vision is for Everton to sit in 13th place for too long. Now, I hope they do take a longer-term view, but I've heard a lot of people say that Everton still need to be careful in terms of how they spend. Now, while I agree that the focus should be on kind of return on investment primarily, I think that's just because even though the stadium's going to help with revenues, we're not going to still have the same level of revenues as a Manchester United or any team that's in the top flights of Europe. That being said, I'm not sure where this idea that we can't spend due to PSR really comes from. And let me elaborate slightly. So I put out all the financial information, and every year I try and do my own projection as to what I think the numbers are going to end up to be. And it's funny what I get off and what I get right. I never quite nail it. I was pretty close this past year. But the point is, PSR is done via 3-year windows now, still. And the nice part is about, if there's ever anything nice about all the points deductions, is we do have some information as to what those numbers are. And I think what's important is that we know what 2024 numbers are. We know what 2023 was. And we've got some idea of what we think our projection's going to be this year because we need to make it for PSR. But people need to remember that everything reboots July 1st. The fiscal year ends June 30th. So really, if you want to think about spend, you got to think about it in the window of fiscal year 2026, which ends next June, this fiscal year that we're currently in that ends this June, and then 2024. So long story short, 2023 was bad for the club. The book loss before PSR exemptions was £89 million. That's kind of a negative number. I mean,
that's some top tier analysis. It's kind of a negative number.
I mean, it's a relative term, so that's bad. That's bad. But we know the PSR number is roughly 63 million. So we've got a little bit of a spread between the actual book loss. Now, 2024, we have some insight into as well, because number one, we literally have the books themselves, and we lost 53 million approximately before PSR exemptions. PSR exemptions, we've been told, are borderline around 23 million for that year. So that gets us to PSR around 30 million or so as a loss. So that being said, in order to make the PSR 105 million, we're going to have roughly, if we use that $23 million a difference, roughly a $34 million loss this year. Now I've got my projections in here. We can talk about it. The point is 23 comes off the books, that terrible 89 million, and 26 comes on starting July 1st. The new stadium is going to jumpstart at least the gate receipts, certainly some of the commercial revenue piece. So, I mean, I've got this thing as we could spend £100 million net, and we're clear as day for PSR. It's not even close. So I'm not sure where, I'm not saying we should or shouldn't, but even with increases in amortization for buying new players, even increases in staff costs, I think we've got a lot of wiggle room too, because like I said before, James, top tier analysis, 89 million pounds in losses is bad. So that's bad. So in theory, all you need to do is better that, which, my God, if we don't better that, I mean, unless we're going to fire 5 managers and Rafa Benitez is going to come in at the last minute and send us down a spiral.
Oh, I can't bring up Thomas Suchek, but you can bring up Rafa. I see.
All right, fine, we're even. So anyway, I long story short, I'll put some of the numbers up in the Discord, but put on my accounting hat a little bit and my financial projections hat, and I don't see any problem with us having a big spend starting July 1st. This year, we may have to be a little bit tight. I think it would be very helpful if we could finish in 13th. It's roughly £3 million a year in places. If we can improve off what we did last year, That's going to make it so it's not so tight this year, so we don't have to sell anyone. Okay, taking a step back, we're making the assumption we can spend money. All right, so this idea that we can't get rid of people because we can't spend money, I think has to go out the window a little bit. And I think there's some concerns about squad turnover. I think that's fair. So I've now set the stage. I think we are ready to plunge in position by position, take a look, see who's on contract, who's not, who's out of contract, who has a year left, and let's make some decisions aided by our lovely listeners and the poll results that we got earlier. Thank you very much.
I don't know. I'm just kind of at a loss for words thinking about the idea of Everton being able to spend money. It's just such a beautiful
I remember
prospect.
last time we did.
Yeah, well, let's try to not do that.
Do we need a number 10?
Yeah, maybe we'll get 3 or 4 of them just for good measure. Let's see how that works. But yes, as Ryan said, we're going to go position by position. We're not going to look at potential incomings, but we will look at the squad position by position and discuss whether we should keep these players, whether we should let them leave, whether we should re-sign them, whether we should loan them, etc. Sort of explore the potential scenarios that are possible.
Well, fundamentally, they can make those decisions now and probably need to very soon.
That's exactly right, yeah. So these are things that the club can action immediately that you don't necessarily need recruitment pieces in place. This is stuff you have to resolve in the immediate future to move forward. And really, it does a lot to aid your summer planning once you figure out what you're doing with the guys you currently got. So with that, we'll start with center forward, striker, up first, probably the position subject to most debate in recent weeks. We, of course, have Beto, we have Trimidi, both signed through the end of not next season, but the season following. And then we, of course, have Dominic Calvert-Lewin, who's out of contract at the end of this year. We know that he was offered a deal, didn't seem too interested in signing it until as of late when it was reported that negotiations have suddenly reopened. So I'll open the floor to you guys. In regard to the striker position, how do we view this in terms of priorities for Everton this summer, as well as what do you do with these 3 guys?
A little bit of context, too, just because we figure Beto's book value is about £12.5 million, something like that, and Trimidi's about 5 or 6. So in theory, you could possibly sell those guys, but that's what you're dealing with. Beto's 27. Dominic Calvert-Lewin is 28. Might mention that, obviously coming off injury, so I think that's a little bit of a factor. But my feeling is even going forward, if you're going to sign Dominic Calvert-Lewin, I think you're going to lose Beto. There's no way he's going to stay here. There's no way. If I'm him, no way I trust that someone's going to choose him before Dominic Calvert-Lewin. And if I'm him, I'm thinking I've performed decently well. I know there's some things he still needs to work on, and I get that, but I think he's going to look back and say, look, my goals mattered, and he certainly works hard. So that's kind of my context that I would kind of put out there, really, that I think that matters.
Yeah, for me, it's, I think Beto's proven himself outstandingly, the second half of the season. Of course, I understand, tactics shape and just, of course, the manager change have a massive kind of contribution to that. To Ryan's point, it's just, you can't sign both. I mean, it won't happen in my opinion, right? If you sign DCL, that means the end of Beto. I completely understand the argument in regards to keeping DCL and being able to sell Beto for a certain value. Totally agree with you guys in the last episode in the sense of, 20 million or so, I think is kind of that entry point to where, okay, that's pretty attractive to the club. But if, you're asking me in regards to exactly who I would keep, it would be keeping Beto and letting DCL kind of walk on a free, and we can get into it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's where I come out on it too. I think Beto has really earned a spot, and though you could potentially nail down a book profit if you sell him at a certain price, I do think, especially if you upgrade around him, what he's been able to do with slightly better offensive output the second half of the season under Moyes, really be interested to see what he could do with really someone elite off that right wing, for example, and a better midfield behind him, creating consistent chances. He's proven himself to be a pretty good finisher. Small sample size the second half of the season, but we know he has that ability. And I just think Dom kind of wore out his goodwill to an extent. Like, if he wanted to sign the deal when it was offered, he should have. I don't think you really should go back and revisit it unless you're all of a sudden getting him on a reasonable wage.
I'll tell you what, I could see a scenario where you sell Beto because you feel like maybe his value won't be any higher in theory. And maybe someone in Italy makes a move and you make a little bit of a book profit on him, which, it didn't look like you were going to get that last year. I also think Beto's a decent player, too. Do I think he's a top-tier starting center forward in the Premier League? No. I think he's probably bottom half and a good, capable backup. That being said, I think it probably would. It seems the striker market's going to be pretty difficult this season. I think a lot of clubs are in for them, and maybe some dominoes might fall in a different way, but I might keep Beto. I might even take some risk and have Trimidi back him up, depending on how it looks, and try and improve elsewhere. Another factor, too, is Njai can play center forward. I mean, maybe he's not exactly the type of center forward that people traditionally would think, but I think David Moyes is not Sean Dyche. He's not forced into a particular profile at center forward, I think. Just my personal opinion. And I think he's actually decent at center forward as long as you're not lumping balls up to him. So I think you put a gun to my head knowing that we're going to spend a lot of money. I would probably try and take opportunity and get some really, really top players elsewhere and just kind of roll with this one. But maybe if Dominic Calvert-Lewin isn't asking for the sun, or just some insane number. My issue is if you sign Dominic Calvert-Lewin, you have to still invest in a center forward. I don't trust him to be fit. I think there's some question that he can even stay fit if he bulks up and gets stronger, like he was before. If he doesn't, I don't know if he's as effective. But yeah, I'm skeptical. I would probably keep Beto and Trimidi. I could see loaning someone in and sending Trimidi out on loan too.
I mean, I think I agree with the point on DCL. And if you're going to sign him and then signing him forces you to then have to sign another guy, there's a upside to signing Dominic Calvert-Lewin. There's a great scenario where he stays fit and he can recapture his finishing ability, which he's lost for 3 seasons now. But I don't view that as a really great solution, to be honest. I am really interested in Trimidi, though, as a backup. The kid's still young. I feel like he really is one that needs game time. He needs to play. Does riding the bench behind a presumably fit Beto suit him or Everton?
It's a good question. It might not. I think the other thing is if the market's not good for center forward, say you sign Dom, sell Beto, get the book profit and apply it to a new player, Everton's also not thought of as a top team right now. They're not the most attractive destination. You've got to convince someone, whether it's a stadium or whatnot, to come in and play. So like Liam Delap, for example. Say you activate his release clause. Several other teams would do that. In order to convince him, you may end up having to pay him a ton of money anyway. I don't know if that's the wisest thing in the world. It also defeats the purpose of getting a young player. So, maybe it's one of those things you do not want to mess and get a center forward acquisition wrong. So that's maybe why I'm thinking table it for another year. Just a thought.
Well, I think also, too, the one thing with Trimidi is, unfortunately, he's had 2 pretty significant injuries, right? And it's a situation where if he was the backup next year, you allow him to kind of just not have as much pressure on him. He can be a cup starter. He could also be somebody that I think comes in and does really well for 20 to 30 minutes. And I think you would start to see value out of him. And I think the club personally would just want to best manage him here, given kind of the injuries, and I think also, too, the potential, because I think we all are in agreement, right? There's a ton of potential still with him, and I think most Evertonians still highly, highly regard him.
I'll also say this. I would not keep Beto if you're going to have him play second fiddle to someone else. Don't get me wrong. If you had a great opportunity to get a big striker, that's great. I'm not saying don't take it, but I wouldn't. Beto's not the type of player to me. He needs game time to get going. He's a little bit clumsy and kind of, he gets better the more he plays, I think. That's just my observation.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And I think he would agree with that too. If you want to keep me, I got to be the guy first on the team sheet at the number 9. So we'll see how that plays out. We meant to hit this before we got into this discussion, and we'll do that for subsequent positions. But we did ask our listeners on X and on Instagram to kind of give their opinion on different players. And we asked, basically, out of the DCL Beto situation, what situation would you prefer happens? And it seems like across both platforms, most people prefer to keep Beto and let Dom leave. Decent amount of people want to keep both, but I think we talked about why that probably just isn't feasible from a negotiation standpoint. Obviously, we don't want both to leave. That seemed to be the consensus last place, but seems like the listeners are pretty much in agreement with us.
Do you think Dominic Calvert-Lewin, part of this is he's just kind of worn out his welcome a little bit?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think that's the sentiment you see on social media channels, right? In terms of, and I think I don't disagree with DCL not signing the deal, when Dyche was the manager. I understand from a tactic standpoint and just the ability, but there was, I feel like, a period of time, right, where the new ownership was there, new manager, right? I have to imagine that there was some window, right, of that deal being taken. But I also think, right, Everton fans love goals, right? And when their strikers scoring goals, and you even saw some fans turn on Beto, right, when he was kind of hitting his unfortunate patch. But he's done a really good job, when you look at kind of the collective season. And I think when it comes down to it, the one skill that I think he is better at, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and is finishing, 1v1 finishing. I just think he, for as much as you say it, Ryan, and you kind of were hitting on it, when he started to get the starting spot, he's a very clumsy guy, but the way he can kind of open up his hips and just be able to kind of, really have some strategic finishes is something you can't really take, for granted.
Yeah, I think the thing with Dom was, rightly or wrongly, you get the clear impression that he thought he was better than Everton in some respect, or that he wanted to move to a bigger club or whatever.
Well, he thought at least he was going to get offered a big deal at a minimum, right?
Exactly. And I think, rightly or wrongly, people take that as a bit of a slight against the club. You've been here your entire career. Why do you want to leave? And then he's just been unfortunately injured, and it kind of undermined any leverage that he really had with other clubs.
Yeah, I mean, not to belabor the point, but he does seem to always say what an honor it is to be the Everton number 9. But yeah, so I mean, it's debate, right? I mean, actions speak louder than words.
All I'll say is you didn't hear that for a while until very recently, right after the news of negotiations reopened, when conveniently an interview came out where he's saying all the right things again. So I don't think he has ever been disrespectful to the club. I think he's a player looking out for his own best interests, which he's perfectly entitled to do. I just think that rubs people the wrong way sometimes.
Oh, I think his agents got in his head and thought that they would get him this big deal, and then when it didn't materialize, and now that he's injured, it's like, man, another injury, they just line up. I think that's where some of the skepticism comes, at least from me. But regardless, belaboring the point, the nice part is the next positional grouping, not as many decisions to make in terms of selling or re-signing.
All right, so moving to the next position, we've got forward/cam, center attacking mid. We've got a few guys here. As you said, a little straightforward here. First, Njai, signed through 2028. Dwight McNeil, signed for another couple years through the 2026-27 season. Really, the debate in this position comes down to, I think, two main guys, and that's Charlie Alcaraz, which we talked about a lot last episode, and then Jesper Lindstrøm, another one, and Jack Harrison being kind of a tertiary distant third discussion point. We asked our listeners about Charlie, Jesper, what do you do in this scenario? Overwhelming majority, I think the consensus here is to activate the clause for Charlie and let Jesper leave, but a number of people wanted to keep both. So curious your guys' thoughts on this situation with this position.
I of course, Charlie, I would really want to check somebody's kind of mental state if they didn't want to keep him at that buy option. But in terms of Jesper, right, as a sale, I think it's an easy no, right? Just given, I think, the hernia surgery, as well as just, I think, also, too, he did some good moments for Everton, but I don't think he impressed as a whole. But as a loan, I would totally be open to it. Of course, it's not taking one of our domestic loan spots. Once again, the continuity piece, right, of adding so many new players. I think he was one that even under Dyche, as well as Moyes, right, I think he did a good job of kind of integrating himself within the squad and what was asked of him. So I'd be more than happy to take him on a loan, but definitely not a sale.
Yeah, I'd take him on loan again, for sure. I don't think we saw the best of him, and I think we would have a better chance of seeing that under David Moyes. I mean, I have some problems with him as a player a little bit. Like, he's incredibly pacey, he's incredibly technical, but he doesn't quite put it all together, And I think part of that is there's just kind of that predictability element of him, I mean, he just doesn't, as we would say over here in the States, doesn't have a lot of sauce. You know what I mean? Like, not a lot of funk. And that matters. You need to have a little bit of that. Like Njai, you're never sure what he's going to do with it. And you need that as an attacking player. But as a loan, Oh, I mean, absolutely. You know, this team is short on technical ability and pace, and he can bring both of those things. And he's got some positional versatility, but the Charlie thing's not even worth talking about. I mean, seriously, on earth. And I think there's some skepticism that Moyes is completely sold on him, but someone needs to grab David Moyes by the lapel and explain to him that, buddy, 12.5 million pounds for a player like this at his age is an absolute no-brainer, and it was good to see him finally get the start. I would imagine we'll see him start the rest of the way. Maybe there's some issues with PSR in terms of timing. The later you can say you're going to exercise it, for sure, probably the better for recognition standpoint. But I'm excited to see what he can do. I think we also agree this is probably going to be an area of investment for us.
Yeah, I think it absolutely has to be. And with that, I'm not opposed to another loan for Jesper. Agree that a buy probably doesn't make sense, but I also think you loan him in. You loan him in as a depth option. You don't loan him in to start because you're going to invest there. And does that suit the player? Like, does he come to and does he agree with that? He's going to want to play. Like he was brought in presumably to start this year, and he got a good number of starts before the injury. I don't think you can persuade him to come on loan to sit on the bench in a lot of games. And I think if you're going for another foreign loan, there's a market there. Like you can find other guys. There's the familiarity and the continuity piece. I just haven't been really convinced by him. And I was really high on him coming in. Just hasn't quite done enough this season to really convince me he's the guy that we should really invest assets into.
I think the only thing I would counter that with, James, is that, you know, we don't know the significance of the hernia surgery, right? So if it kind of bleeds into the season, that could be kind of, you know, on our end, right, a strategic look. And I think the one thing is Moyes was looking at him when he was at Frankfurt, right? So Moyes truly does value the player. I agree with you. I don't think he should be a starter, but I certainly think he'd be somebody that could get minutes. But yeah, if there's a better opportunity elsewhere, right, where he'd be kind of a nailed-on starter, of course they'd probably look at that. But I think the injury kind of almost lends us in a good way in regards to potentially getting him on loan, just given that he might, like, similar to Jack a few seasons ago, right? He might not be ready for the start of the season.
And does Jesper, I mean, is Dwight a depth piece too in the next season, right? So is he third option off the right? Does he play off the left? He does give a little more versatility than I think maybe we've seen from him in an Everton shirt. He can play in different spots, but I don't know. You got McNeil already. If you're going to go big on right wing, I think you bring in a guy who's really suited to that role and can just hit the ground running.
And I will say this, if you bring in someone big at right wing that you think you can count on, you've got, you know, McNeil maybe can play over there. We're not sure. To me, this is the perfect opportunity to bring in kind of a loan to buy or a younger player that can kind of ease into the squad a little bit. But we need someone on the right side, though. That's a natural there, too. And I think whether Dwight can be that or not, the jury's still out, and you need more than that regardless. So
100%.
Yep. Anyway, one consideration too is maybe Harrison Armstrong can fill in a little bit at Cam. You know, I know he played deeper with Derby, and I know we're about to get him in a second, but it's just a thought. You know, if you see how Tim Irabunum was used this past time, he has less responsibility in that role, and I think some of the things that Harrison Armstrong would need to work on is defensive positioning, winning battles in the middle of the pitch if he's going to play deeper. So, sorry. Without further ado, next positional grouping, James.
And that is center mid, defensive mid. A lot of names on this list. We know this is definitely an area of need, but we start with Tim Irabunum, signed for a couple more years on contract. There's, of course, Harrison Armstrong, signed for another 3 years. Mangala, do we look for another loan there? We'll go through these guys in just a second, but just as an overview, Garner with just 1 year left on his deal. And then I think the big names, the debate, Doucouré and Idrissa Gana. This is the one we asked our listeners about, and again, pretty emphatic vote that they want Gana to stay and Doucouré probably leave. There are a good amount of people who want to try to keep both, though, for depth. So, and last on that list is Tyler Onyango, but I don't know that we need to dedicate too much of the discussion to Tyler. No disrespect intended. So maybe we start with Tim. What do we think of his prospects of being in and around the first team next year?
Ryan, I think you need to start, please.
Oh, sure. I'll talk about the Enchanter. I'd happy to. No, in all seriousness, his role is just going to be limited. It can't really be much else. You saw how effective he could be, though, when we're killing a game off, and just to put his energy and athleticism in and kind of like that 10 role, you know, let him roam around and be disruptive and make things happen. And that's great. I think fundamentally, though, he has so many flaws as a player. I just don't know what you do with him. So I mean, he's got 2 more years. I would like to see him in a loan situation. Maybe you could recoup some of that value. Keep in mind, he was a PSR guy. That being said, you look at how few numbers we have here in midfield, and it is concerning. He's 21. He's still very young. Won't be 22 until June. That's a pretty young age for a kid that's gotten some of the experience he has. I'm sure his wages aren't massive, but I think you just need to make a decision. Do you use him as kind of a helpful piece chasing a game or killing a game in a certain role, or to give him a chance and maybe see him develop? He's got a lot of tools for sure. I mean, it seems to me unlikely that he could develop. I'd love to see a loan for this guy, though, just depending on what the depth would look like. And I'll couple him in with Harrison Armstrong, too, who's on long-term. I would rather see Harrison Armstrong take his minutes, because I think that's a kid that has some special stuff that other people don't really have on the team. He was so noticeably good and clean on the ball in Derby. And I just don't know. He might be more of an attacking player. And I think he has some positional versatility as well. Certainly love to see him get runs in cup matches, but who knows what that looks like. I'm sure a lot of championship teams will come in for him as well. It'd be lovely to take them both on loan.
Yeah, I'm with you, Ryan. I think both on loan for me is kind of an easy decision. Now, of course, if we come to a place where we're low on numbers in that position, I think you have to keep somebody like Harrison Armstrong, because I think he would be a valuable piece off the bench. And if you impress Sean Dyche, that's something that has to be said for something, right? But of course, I think the ability to get Tim on loan would really help the player as well as the club, just because I think he needs minutes, and I think he needs to be able to really learn from some of these kind of significant kind of errors or mistakes in his game, right, that are truly on display when he kind of is put in a position where he can't succeed. But I'd love to see Harrison Armstrong, for example, go back to Derby, right, and kind of build off that great campaign that he had last year. He has the familiarity, of course, with John Eustace. And so I think in a perfect world, right, because it would just only make the player better. And I think for us, kind of take away the responsibility of giving him a significant amount of minutes.
Yeah, I think you guys said enough on Tim. I think if he's getting meaningful minutes in an Everton team like next year, it means that we've probably failed in the market in the summer as far as center mids are concerned. Harrison Armstrong is one where I'm okay with. Love, to your point, Ryan, see him take those minutes that might be available. But I think long term, he's on contract for another 3 seasons. Let him take another step in his game. Go to maybe Derby had a great end of their season and moved up the table enough to stay safe, but I'd like to see him maybe try his trade at a higher level championship team, or even a foreign loan potentially if there's interest there, just for the advancement of his career. And then he plays over 1,000, 2,000 minutes next season on loan, and he comes back the following year ready to meaningfully contribute to the Everton team.
It just starts getting tricky because you start playing a numbers game a little bit here, because if you do what the pollsters say, well, let's hit it. I think we all agree we'd love to keep Gana, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Even I think at a significant wage on a 2-year deal, I'd take a chance at it. I think he's that good and that versatile. He can play and help us almost no matter what. I think that is worth taking, in my opinion. So if we universally agree with that, what do we feel about Doucouré? Because I want to get to Garner first, but I think some of the numbers matter a little bit before you start talking James Garner.
I'm just really disappointed that Gana is not going on podcasts, talking about his contract situation. There's a certain
isn't it?
There's a certain standards, conversation that really comes to, fighting for your wages, right? But in all seriousness, no, I would hope that Gana truly wants to stay. Of course, those Saudi links that were kind of came and went pretty quickly, but of course that's still a possibility. In terms of Doucouré, right, it truly seems that him and the club are at an impasse in regards to what he feels like he's worth. It seems like he's been offered a contract, according to him, but it's not up to his personal standard, which is totally fine in regards to him voicing that, and I can appreciate that from him. But I also think, and you mentioned this on the last pod, Ryan, it's just some of what makes Doucouré great seems to have taken a step back this season, right? And there's no question to me that he's still a very important player, but I also think it's kind of the Beto syndrome in the sense of I don't trust that he's going to be a great squad member if he's not playing, the amount of minutes that he's played for Everton right in the last few seasons. So that's another thing where I think Gana, Personally, of course, I think he would still play a significant role. But even if he wasn't, I don't think he would have as much of an issue with it.
Yeah, I think to both of your points, Gana's a guy who I'd just pay almost whatever it takes within reason to keep him, because you haven't seen any sort of decline. If anything, you've seen improvement or just consistency in his level. Maybe end of the season he's wearing down and he's gassed, but okay, fair enough. He's 35 years old. Doucouré, when players start to wane a little bit and the legs start to go, that can happen pretty quick. And I think if you commit to another year of Doucouré, the decline could continue rapidly, and you're left with a piece who just really can't contribute meaningfully week in, week out.
Interesting, we were talking about two guys you would think Gana would be younger. Gana's 35.
Right. That's what I mean.
There is risk he will eventually fall off the face of the earth a little bit too. Doucouré's 32, but ironically, I feel like I don't think you keep both. I think really both are better suited with a little more freedom in midfield and with someone who's more of a sitter, And Doucouré's progression, which was always his key. I know everyone says he can't trap the ball and pass the ball, whatever nonsense. But he got the ball up and down the pitch back in the day, by carry and by pass. And the numbers indicate that as well. I'm not seeing that anymore with him, but we haven't seen him playing in that center mid position either. So, but yeah, I don't see him as being a starter. Ideally, I think we invest significantly in this position as well. That being said, that brings me to James Garner. So we talked about how limited the numbers are. So say we do manage to follow the polls and keep Gana. Maybe we keep one of Harrison Armstrong and Irabuna. Maybe. I mean, still, there are no numbers here. So James Garner, I don't think James Garner, he's 24 years old. He's got some talent. He's a solid player. He can't be a starter, I think, in the Premier League going forward, even if you sign Gana. Doesn't mean he's a bad player, but I see his limitations. He's worked very hard to improve them. He really has. And he's an admirable player, and he has some positive traits. But if someone were to offer £25 million for him, would you not take it?
Oh my God. I'm taking that deal.
His market value is $20 million. That's what Transfer Market said. You're telling me someone coming up, one of those three teams, I think I would not be surprised if someone were to pay $25 million for him.
With a year left on his deal, you think?
Yes.
I guess that's just enough to really make it worth it.
He's English.
Happy to take that.
I'm just saying I would do it. Now you've got to sign literally 2 or 3 players in midfield at this point. I would do that personally because I just don't see his ceiling. I don't think he'll be anything better than a below average starter for sure at any position. And I think his value might be the highest it's going to be. Just kind of my take on things. Not trying to give a hot take. I just think he's somewhat limited.
So I think the one thing that kind of would hurt that theory is he's had a pretty nagging back injury that's kind of kept him out, right, the last 2 seasons, right, for extended periods. So I do think, a club that's going to spend, especially coming up, that amount of money, right, they're probably going to want to look at a more guaranteed option. I'm of the camp, and this might be a hot take as well, I'd probably extend him in terms of his contract, and if it's a fair wage, right, of course.
Well, don't you have to do one or the other at this point?
Yeah,
I mean, have we not learned anything, right?
No.
You got to either extend him a little bit or sell him.
Yeah, I would extend him. Hopefully he doesn't take DCL's advice and just sits on it. But I would extend him just simply because I think we're in a summer, right, where there's just so much mystery. Now, of course, Ryan, if we get an offer, even north of, let's just say, 18 million or 16 million, I still think you probably take that, right, because it's a good offer. I think there are limits to the player. But I also think, too, he is a valuable piece in terms of the grand scheme of things. He is limited, but I do think when he's been given an extended run, and keep in mind, he's not a center defensive midfielder, right? And that's kind of where, unfortunately, he's had to play a little bit given this current setup. But I think if he's in a more attacking role, he's still decent at set pieces and better on his day, right? So we need kind of those guys in the squad. So if it was up to me in regards to a realistic situation, I'd probably offer him an extension at fair wages, right? Probably a 2-year contract, nothing significant, and keep him, right? And just hope that also, too, these injuries kind of come away from him because he has had a good second half of the season. He's been a part of, our kind of ascension in the second half of the year under Moyes. So yeah, that for me, I think that's just a player I'd want to keep. But of course, like you said, if you get an offer over 20 million, you take it and run.
100%. I think we signed him. The rumored fee was rising to as much as 15 million with incentives. I don't know that he will have hit those incentives or not. Probably just appearances or something along those lines. 15 to 20, I'm happily taking that. Otherwise, you do have to give him some kind of extension just to protect yourself on the other side of this year.
Also, I want to mention, too, Mangala is going to be out for a while, so I'm not sure why people are suggesting you wouldn't buy someone that's coming off an ACL tear. I think maybe people don't realize the extent of the injury. I mean, most likely we won't see him before January, so you definitely wouldn't go with a loan. Maybe you get a loan in January or something. Maybe it's just a thought. Yeah, well, no one's gonna do that. So I wouldn't think. So I think it's almost a given there. As much as we liked him as a player, don't get me wrong. I do think there's an obvious need to get a couple guys that can get on the ball. No question in midfield. Take the game by the scruff of the neck, guys. Very important.
I mean, if you just took his body of work in an Everton shirt this year and removed, like, even if he just didn't play for whatever reason the rest of the year, or was a different injury or something, I think you take him as a piece, but it's just too risky with the injury.
Yeah, he was so expensive, too, for the Texter buy. So, I mean, there's no way they're going to recoup anything from a book standpoint. Tyler Nyango is out of contract, too. I would mention this. He did finally come back and play in the PL2 playoffs for a half, but he's playing center back half the day. Even when he was in Stockport, he was playing there. So I think it's fairly obvious he's not a midfielder regardless, and my guess is they'll let him go.
I wish him the best of luck in the rest of his career. Still only 22, which I don't know why I feel like he's been in and around the picture for
he's
a decade now.
He's fairly mobile for a 6'7" guy. I mean, I think there's something there, but I just don't think we're the type of team that's going to have the patience to really make it happen for him. But you never know. You never know. He might do something at the lower levels. I wish him the best too.
All right, let's get into the fullback discussion. Another major area of need for Everton.
Do we need a right back? Have we ever needed a right back?
No, I think we're good, actually. I think we're probably good. So, of course, we start with Nathan Patterson, signed for another 2 years. We then have Mykolenko with only a year left on his deal. Seamus and Ashley Young, both out of contract at the end of this season. And then Roman Dixon at the end, kind of the youth option. We asked our listeners about Mykolenko and Patterson specifically. Again, pretty strong consensus here that Mykolenko should stay and Patterson should leave. But a fair amount of people, again, in favor of keeping both of them. What do we think of that debate? I guess for my input, I'd say sell Patterson, but what's he even worth? Transfer market has his value at 15 million euros. That seems crazy high to me. That's like as much as we paid for him, or honestly, you think he's worth 10 at best. And Mykolenko, I've kind of been impressed with Mykolenko down the stretch this season. I don't think he should be our starting left back, but I think if he's okay with being a backup option, you offer him an extension on reasonable terms, be okay with him as our backup next season, no question.
Yeah, so with Patterson, I'm kind of with you, James. Unfortunately, we've seen the limits of him. It's nice that he's been given an extended run under Moyes to some understanding, but I just don't see how this player improves on a loan, right? I don't see kind of him being, especially as we're looking up the table rather than kind of mid or lower, that he would be any sort of kind of plausible option, right? So I think if whatever you can get out of him this summer in a sale, even if you're taking a massive hit, I think you have to take. In terms of Mykolenko, he's kind of an interesting one, right? I know there were some weird links last year with Napoli in regards to the left back situation, but you look at kind of transfer market value of 28 million, I think that's a bit rich. But I think almost similar to the Garner situation, where if you get kind of an offer that's 20 million or higher, I think you have to take it. But if you don't, right, and if it's just kind of a situation where it's a bit of crickets and you don't really see much out of him, I would also be open to similarly giving him an extension, given that 1 year is left on his contract. I agree with you. I think he's done a pretty damn good job overall under Moyes and even under Dyche for the most part of just kind of really being a pretty stout contributor at that position and reliable, of course, as well as just, always stopping some of the best players. It's just his limits offensively, right, are going to kind of really show as this team starts to improve.
In a limited role, he could be a piece, right?
Oh, 100%. Absolutely.
Ryan, your thoughts?
I'd sell Mykolenko. I just don't think he's good enough. Credit to him for how effective he's been defensively on left back, but I think that's also really aided by a lot of support around him and by the fact that he hasn't really had to jump into the attack that much. I'm not saying it's easy to shut down someone like Mo Salah or anyone on a week-to-week basis. It's a tough ask, but I do think it's a lot easier to play that position when you don't necessarily have to venture forward. I think going forward, he's so limited. But that being said, if he was willing to take a deal for a couple of years at a reasonable wage and no one comes in at a significant amount of money for him, I mean, you could do worse. But I think we need to invest then. If that does happen, maybe you can spend a little less on a more attacking-based fullback on the left side that's kind of more of kind of a prospect, and they can learn a little bit behind him and ease their way into it. But the bottom line is you got to make a decision, right? He's got a year left. So I would try and see what I could get for him. I'd be interested. Someone might take a shot at him in another league and he might do just fine. Patterson, I think he's worth a loan. And the reason why I say that is because I don't think you're going to recruit anything from him. But I do think if you put him in a lower league, I think he'd do pretty well. I think some of his obvious issues with decision-making, some of his defensive issues. I think if you played him on a team that was on the ball a lot, that was very aggressive, one of the better teams in their league, I think some of his skill on the ball would show. I think his size, his athleticism, maybe he's not that agile, but his pace, I think might attract a suitor. And I mean, you got one more year of amortization to kind of go down, and I think you can maybe get something for him, but it's a risk either way. I'm just skeptical in general of him as a player. I don't think he has a future here or in the Premier League, but you're rolling the dice either way there. I think we need serious investment at fullback.
Do you re-sign Ashley Young for a year if he's open to it?
Nope.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think you can. Done a great job for us, but
great job.
No, if you're going to have I just think there's maybe not a cheaper backup option, but if money is you're not pinching pennies. I mean, he was a pinching penny deal. So,
well, do you sign Seamus?
No, unfortunately. I just think
It's so sad to say that, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think his time's up.
Would you sign one of the two?
Now with this kind of free agent fullback market, I feel like there's some decent options out there, and
Great
of course
call.
We'll get to it in the summer, right? But I feel like that's a market where even like a Mykolenko sale, like just kind of give you an example, right? You can sell Mykolenko and then potentially sign Kyle Walker-Peters. I know it's not his preferred position, right? But like if you were getting to that point, right, that's decent book value.
Maybe it's ageist of me, but I draw the line at 40-year-old first-team players, whether they're squad players or not. 39 is the upper limit of what I'll tolerate.
How dare you?
Well, we're not
It's
signing
the age and height
offense.
discrepancy in regards to this podcast.
See, I already hear it now, right? Right? Now I get it, right? I'm the old guy in the pod. That's a direct shot at me, all right? You already started earlier with the Suchek comment, okay? I see what you're doing. Normally it's Sean harassing me and antagonizing me, and now it is James today. Thanks a lot.
To be fair, Suchek meets both the age and height requirements.
Just
so,
stop. Don't do that, okay? That doesn't make the pod better.
I'd like to see Seamus join Leighton Baines on the coaching staff in some capacity, but I think he'd probably want to play. Maybe he'll go back to like Ireland, play in the Irish league.
That'd
Why
be cool
not?
for him
I think
for a
that
bit.
would be cool.
Yeah, I'd love to have him stick around, though, clearly. I just feeling his body's... I mean, he's 36, Young is 39. I think, Sean, you make a really good point, the marketplace. I'll say this, too. I know Roman Dixon maybe isn't everyone's cup of tea, but he's 20 years old. You'd love to see a loan because you've got him signed for multiple years. So, I mean, I wouldn't lose all hope from him. He's still really young. Just 20. So I'm optimistic that maybe he could have a place later. The other thing to remember, too, is Jake can play right back. I know we don't necessarily want to do that, but it's still an option, so maybe you can take risk here. I seriously would sell everyone, though, in this position. I know it sounds crazy, but yeah, I think the market's going to be really high. I think it's going to be set early, too. I have a feeling someone's going to come in for Wesley at Flamenco, who I know we loved and would have been an Everton player already if he was asking for anything reasonable. But I think he's going to go for there are no fullbacks out there. That guy has top end ceiling. Like Frimpong looks like he might go to Liverpool. That's another one. That was our guy. Remember, James, when we did the assessment back in the day, that's the guy I wanted when we moved for right backs before. And just, you're going to see all the names that we were linked with, like Livramento, who we had done for like £4 million. You know what? £4 million done, dusted. Rafa came in and killed the deal. I mean, it was literally done. So it is what it is. Now, I'd sell it sounds ridiculous. I'm saying this. I sell everyone and totally reboot from here. I'm not kidding.
It's probably our biggest position of need, arguably. And I also feel similarly that I would just clean house and just start from scratch. Like, why not? Just buy a starter and a backup or a verse. You have Jake it right back potentially. So I think that's not the craziest idea. We'll see what happens. But I do hope Seamus gets on the pitch at least for a few minutes against Southampton.
And the thing is, look, I think David Moyes should be entitled to bring in a free or two that's going to help him retain some leadership in here. But I don't think you need that much of it on this squad. But that's just my take. So, anywho, moving on.
All right, so moving into the center back, starting with Jared Branthwaite. He's on contract and has a club option to extend for at least another year after this coming year. So club holding a lot of cards in regard to his future. We'll see. Definitely not a need to sell. I think some people thought maybe if there were financial constraints, he's obviously the piece where you could most quickly see.
Still might happen.
It's still possible, but the urgency isn't necessarily there. The club can make an informed decision. And again, if someone comes in with an outrageous offer, you have to take it. But they've held to their guns so far, stuck to their guns, and refused to sell to clubs who are trying to lowball us, and I think that will continue.
I still see him going to City. Maybe it's not this year. I hope he stays.
Yeah.
I do. I hope he stays. I do. I mean, it'd be because when we start having to sell people, man, things get complicated, right?
Yeah.
But either way, we're in a great position with him too, and I think we got to like a little bit the situation we're in with Jake, right?
Yeah, we got Jake on contract through the 28-29 season, so he's got a lot of time to continue to develop, and hopefully Moyes clearly likes him, clearly values him, so you'd expect he'd see additional minutes next season. James Tarkowski, first one that's potentially up for debate, and then Michael Keane, who is out of contract at the end of the season. We polled our listeners. It was almost unanimous. Let Michael Keane go, unsurprisingly, and keep or extend Tarkowski. I'll hand it to you guys first on this one. I might have a slightly unconventional take on this.
I was really kind of torn after I saw that 3-second snippet of Michael Keane celebrating at the weekend. It really kind of just changed the story again. But no, in all seriousness, Tark, I think, for me is an interesting one because I feel like he's going to have a decent market, right, in terms of just the collective Premier League as well as potentially the Championship. The wages, I think, would have to go down, right? Just given also to his function on this team, right? He should not be a starter the season, the next season, or even the season after, right? Whether he was okay with that or not is kind of another question, right? So I think it kind of comes down to the terms of if he's okay with kind of being a spot starter / backup, which for a guy that's played 111 straight Premier League games, kind of like in the Doucouré Beto situation, I don't know if he'll be okay with. Keane it's kind of one of those situations where I'd have to scan the free market to really understand, can we get a Premier League or even just a good center backup, right? That would be a fourth stringer, because that's essentially what he would be. I wouldn't be opposed either way. I'm kind of torn on that one, genuinely. Just take all the Keane hate aside. I seriously hope for his mental health that he goes to a situation that he's just not, pelted every single week, because that, I think for his sanity, he should leave. But if he wants to stay and the club offers him a contract, right? Fine. That the wages are fair. Mason Holgate, once again, hope he has a good career elsewhere, but just so glad to get off that contract. Probably one of the worst contracts that we have on the club. So yeah,
I'd be okay if he went somewhere and didn't have a great career. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of happened already, Ryan. So, but yeah. So it's kind of interesting. That's another one where almost, you kind of take revisionist history and look a few years ago, right, where we got Tark so well on a free. Is there kind of another opportunity for us to kind of scan that market and kind of find that next summer, right? I don't know.
So you don't offer. What if Tark takes a year extension, same wage?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Because I think kind of like, I wanted to bring this up. I would have loved if the club, I understand it's a high wage, would have just triggered the Doucouré extension for 1 year, because it would have saved us a lot of heartache in regards to this issue. And so if the club wants to kind of, be a little bit more proactive on that And I think the club really does like Tarkowski. I think Moyes likes Tarkowski, right? That's the reason why he continues to start him. I'd be more than happy to kind of have him still be a part of the club, because I think my worry about him earlier in the season was that he's regressed. But when he played next to somebody that was not Michael Keane, and whether it be Jake or JB, he was very steady once again.
Presumably the club captain in waiting, right? I mean, if Seamus goes, who else is it going to be? It almost has to be Tark. I can't think. Pickford, I guess, is Pick's the obvious. Duh. We haven't done keepers yet. That's why I didn't.
Yeah, but Pick's a maniac too. So I mean, and also I do kind of subscribe to the idea that not having the on-field captain be the keeper, just it's hard to go and talk to the referee if you're coming from all the way in the back. And
also, you don't want Pickford being the guy talking to referees. Probably he's liable for a red card or two.
I mean, some keepers are great leaders. He might be one, but most of them are slightly off their rocker as well. I actually like the idea of Tark playing in the middle of a back three for a little bit of times too. I'd love to see Moyes kind of dial up some wrinkles from a tactical standpoint, and I think some of the rest of our team could fit into that schema right now as well too. I just think it's an interesting possibility. He has done a little bit of that in the past. But I will say this, I always think about kind of how his Everton teams developed as well. And Tark's a good box defender, but, eventually you want to phase out from that and play with some more athleticism. I just think, my guess is Michael Keane will want to leave as well. I mean, try and go somewhere else. For sure, if I'm a team that's coming up, I mean, you could do a lot worse than that guy to have as a box defender as, a third option, if not, if you're going to play behind the ball, even to start at times. I mean, you never know. He might respond better. He's an obvious guy that you want to root for, I think, for sure.
Or at center forward, Ryan. So
there you go. Team up with Will, double down somewhere else. No one's mentioned Reece Welch. I mean, come on. No, he signed for another year actually after this one, which is kind of interesting. My guess is they try and loan him back out. He's 21, but I don't see him amounting to. I just don't think.
I feel
he's
like
got
some
the
of these
foot
guys
skills.
are aging backwards. Like, how is it's just like what you brought up, James, with Tyler Anyango. Like, this guy's been on Earth for I feel like 40 years. Like, how is he 22? Like,
go back and look at the ages now of the guys that are actually on the U21 team. It's unbelievable how young they are. That's how it's supposed to be. It's a developmental squad. What are we doing?
That might be part of it. Is that Onyango and Welch broke through to the U21s at an appropriate age, whereas the rest of the team were all in their mid-20s at that point.
I think also, I mean, look, I've seen both these guys pretty up close. Welch in particular, I just don't think he has the foot skills to do it. I mean, he has the size, he has some athleticism. There's no hope that he could become a player, but I just think he's, it's not going to happen here, I don't think. I do wish that guy best of luck as well, too. And no, it's not just height bias.
I'll just say one last thing on Michael Keane. Kind of to what you were saying, Ryan, a team coming up could do worse than Michael Keane. We could do worse than Michael Keane at a fourth spot on the depth chart at center back, but I'd also rather you have that be maybe a younger guy.
I'd also
Just
like to invest
in the position.
Or invest in some guys with some positional flexibility. You know what I mean? I think it's hard to find guys that play two positions adequately, but if you get a couple guys that can do it, I mean, you're just going to save on squad costs. It allows you to go bigger in certain areas or maybe bring in a younger player here or there. So that's just my take on things. Some of those players do exist. But either way, I think JB being sold would be a big curveball. But otherwise, I think this will continue to be a position of strength. And if you keep Tark, you can maybe take a run at a young player as your fourth center back. And maybe they're more defensive oriented and could play one of the defensive fullbacks too. And you'd take, in essence, two positions and give them opportunities. I don't know. I think it's exciting, kind of interesting. It'd be interesting to find a left footer that could play as a defensive fullback. Maybe you could sell Mykolenko easier if that's the case too.
One thing I'd want to say, because in terms of the JB to City situation, which if it does happen this summer, that could be for a club like Everton right now that's looking for bodies. You look at attaching somebody like James McAtee or Nico O'Reilly, right, to a deal like that, especially with kind of high money. City have the bodies, so if there was a summer for Everton potentially to kind of do that and it be in their best interest, right, to continue to add some young talent, right, that's kind of a wrinkle to think about.
I think part of the challenge of that too is you don't have the same recruitment team in place, and God knows if any of those Lee Sargison's going to stay. I think that's a little bit some of the challenges. Like next year might be the year to best do something like that. But hey, at least we hold the cards on this one, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And of all the positions, that's one where you think we're reasonably comfortable, can maybe add a couple pieces and be very, very solid. Especially
So we'd say
with
universally, keep Tark provided he's not going to break the bank. Yes?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Correct. Yep.
I think that's right. And we'll put a bow on that. Move to the last position, goalkeeper. We, of course, have Jordan Pickford signed through the end of the season after next. Backing him up, we have João Virginia, who is out of contract after this season. And then Asmir Begovic. It's interesting because depth at keeper is not something, A, that is a priority for most clubs, and B, something Everton have had to worry about for a long time, though this past Saturday gave us a little bit of a scare on that front. What do you guys think? Virginia's got to be gone, right? He's going to want to start somewhere, go somewhere he can get consistent minutes. Begovic is a guy, you could see him maybe just staying on for another year and be the true backup, but I think you probably need a third guy to sit between those two. I think Begovic probably third choice at this point.
It's tough. I mean, I would love to take a run at a younger keeper. Now, we have a lot of numbers in the PL2. No one that's that close, I don't think. I mean, no one at least that I see. Billy Creelan's still here. He's like 24 years old. I don't think people really... There you go, Sean. Now, that's a guy that's actually of the right age, shall I say. Yeah, I think you could take a run at maybe a young keeper, like a Dare to Be Great type of situation. You know, I'd love for us to dip in MLS for that one. I can think of a couple names. But yeah, if the price is right, I think this is the try and find the good, young, talented keeper that maybe wants to learn behind Pickford. Bego seems like a really solid citizen, an incredibly intelligent person, and someone that I think you want to have around the club. So I would hope he'd want to stay. You could do a lot worse than him at backup, honestly. I mean, I look some of the guys out there, but yeah, I don't think this is an area where we're going to make significant investment. And look, it seems like every year, too, if you really wanted to get that second or third guy, there's going to be someone out there and it's free. You know, that's pretty decent. Yeah, that's just how it is. And plus, we need to continue to have older people. So for those of you that aren't agists. But yeah, I'd love to see an up-and-coming keeper come in right now and maybe get to play in the cups and things like that. I mean, Pickford's not going to be here forever, but knock on wood, he has shown to be very durable. And Pick's only 31. You know, I mean, he turned 31 in March. That's still not that old for a keeper. And so I think it'd be really tough to convince someone to come in and, you know, they're not going to have a lot of opportunities and nor should they really.
Yeah, kind of like you, Ryan. It's I would hope that Begovic would love to stay because I think you can't really say enough good things about that guy. I think he's just been a model citizen for Everton and just somebody that I think, if called upon, right, could just do a job for a period of time. It would be interesting if they could get a young target. I think the hard part would be is just selling that kind of club on playing time or even the player per se.
Yeah, keepers need minutes, right, Sean?
Yeah, yeah. And so just getting that in cup games, right? And I even think, right, as the club continue to look up and try to actually win these cup competitions, right, or go on a famous cup run, you'd probably even take that guy out, right, after a certain period of time. One guy that comes to mind, of course, is Hermansen from Leicester. But, of course, I would just think even if we can meet the price, it's just the players' kind of ambitions to play week in and week out, right, wouldn't be achieved. So I think you go with the Begovic, and I think you probably look. I think MLS actually, Ryan, is a great shout because you could probably find somebody that's developmental in the piece of wanting to learn behind somebody like Pickford, and then also too getting enough match time where it makes sense. I mean, João Virginia, right, kind of did that for a few years here, and he was happy. So.
Well, the one thing I will say, the one curveball, and then I want to hear from James on this one for sure, is Pickford's got 2 years left, right? So to me, if you bring in someone that's got some potential now, in theory, they may prove to be pretty darn good, and maybe some English club would overpay for Pickford. I mean, it's not the craziest idea. He is on a big wage. I know he's very good and has been critical in just staying up, but if we identify the right guy, there's nothing wrong with someone young to take over. Just a thought, just a wrinkle,
No, I think it's the right thought process. It's really now one of the few positions where you can start to really, really think long-term and not have to worry about the immediate future. And in that way, you do some succession planning and you get the guy who could be the guy in a couple years and give him the opportunity to get occasional minutes. And there's a sell to a young keeper on that, right? Pickford's contract situation, you can make a compelling case for why you would sign to Everton, even if you're not going to be the number one guy.
And to me, that's the best way you do it, because you avoid this situation where so many clubs in the Premier League have gotten to, where you overpay significantly, right, for a keeper that, whether they're a journeyman or even somebody like Chelsea, right, that's spending 20 million every transfer window, right, on somebody that can plug and play. So if you can spend, right, let's just say 5 to 10 million or even lower than that on somebody that is a project, right, but somebody that you're not relying on to kind of just save the world, it puts us in a very good position. And worst case scenario, right, they're a flop, but the club doesn't really, get a hit on wages. But best case scenario, there's somebody that could potentially challenge Pickford, right, and maybe take the starting spot, right, 3-4 years down the line. Low
risk, high reward.
Yeah, with that being said, I think you're pretty close to making a decision on Pick again from a contract standpoint. I mean, really, goalkeeper is not a position you want to mess with. And when you've got a top guy, and I think at this point he's unequivocally top, I think he's gotten better, frankly. He's more steady. Even if he's a bit of a maniac back there, I mean, you could do a lot worse than locking this guy down. It would be nice to have, for sure, some guys longer term at premium positions, but we still got a little time to make that decision for sure. I think it's very interesting to see what we'll do in this position, because I could see it going a lot of different ways.
Yeah, most definitely. It'll be one that we can rest easy at night. I think there's a lot of scenarios that Everton could execute that really put us in a good spot regardless coming into next season with the goalkeeper position. Other positions, I think there's a lot more variances. It could go very, very good, or it could go quite disastrously depending on where we decide to allocate the funds and who we decide to re-sign of this group. I think this was a good discussion, guys. I think thank you firstly to our listeners for agreeing with us, or we agreed with you on most of the questions we asked. So we're all in alignment, I think, as a fan base, at least on the Blue Frontier. Before we wrap things up, any final words, gentlemen?
One thing I like to say, and it's non-Everton related, but prayers to Taiwo Awoniyi. Guy's in an induced coma from the incident that happened this weekend at Nottingham Forest. Really unfortunate situation. We wish him the best. Hope he has a, of course, healthy recovery, but just a real shame to see what happened, and I just want to make sure to call that out.
Yeah, God, I mean, there's so much we don't know about that one, but yeah, that's pretty tragic. He's a pretty darn good player too, and I mean, I just can't even fathom what's going on within that. That being said, pivoting back to the football in Everton, I mean, I do want to thank all the listeners for their participation. I still, though, in general, I'm going to be totally bullish about wanting to turn over this team completely. I think I maintain that attitude in here. I'm going to keep doing it, and I'd be fine with selling quite a few of these guys, and I just would encourage people to do a little deep dive into the numbers too. I think we're going to be much better off than people realize. I think the Friedkins are going to make a big investment, and I think we should be excited. My nervousness comes on making the right selections and choices, and I really think that head of recruitment role is going to be critical, and it needs to happen very, very fast. They should not have been blindsided by the Dan Purdy thing, by the way. I think anyone should have thought and said, okay, if you're going to go away from the model, this guy's already been the head of recruitment. He's done a lot more than the role you're going to put him in. He's already done well for several other people out there. You should have known that this might happen. Kudos to Dan for making the decision very early, as soon as he saw how it was going to play out. But the club may have been surprised or disappointed by it. They should not have been surprised, though. And hopefully Angles will be able to turn around and get the right guy in the door immediately.
Yeah, things have to move fast in the back room before we can even really realistically consider what moves we'll make regarding the squad, and hopefully that happens within the next couple of weeks.
And I do not want to hear anyone named that was Moyes' guy in the past. That balance is not going to work in the committee. We need balance to balance the long term with the short term. I'd prefer to go farther on the long term. We'll see what happens, though.
We certainly will, and we'll stay close to it, of course, and provide you with all of the latest as it unfolds. Thank you for tuning into this episode of The Blue Frontier. We really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, do us a solid. Leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice. Follow us on socials. Link in the description. Join our Discord. Absolutely. We've had a few more people popping in. We just passed 500 members, which is a nice milestone for us. So thanks to the community, and we appreciate you very much. We'll leave it there. Until next time, we'll be with you following Southampton on Sunday. Until then, up the Toffees.